Good evening. I wanted to welcome everyone, and we're going to start the work session this evening.
And on behalf of the Lane County Planning Commission, we'll open our work session as well.
Staff, would you like to begin?
Sure. My name's Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for long-range planning for the City of Eugene. And I have with me Emily Jerome from the City of Eugene Attorney's Office and Robin Hostick, our planning director. Staff, would you want to introduce yourselves?
Lydia McKinney, Land Management Division Manager and Planning Director for Lane County.
And I'm Mark Rust, Associate Planner with Lane County Planning Department.
So the first part of this evening is a presentation on Eugene's urban growth boundary proposal, and it's for the benefit of both commissions and the public that are here tonight, as well as the people who are watching on the web or on Metro Television. So I'll just launch right into it as long as you're ready. It should take less than a half hour, and then we're going to have a break where members of the public can ask staff questions about what they saw in the presentation and view the materials that are in the back of the room. And then we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock for the public hearing. Okay. So we're really pleased to be here after about 6 years of front-end work getting to the best possible proposal for Eugene's urban growth boundary. I'm going to cover a little bit of history on the Envision Eugene community process, the process for adopting an urban growth boundary itself, what's in Eugene's urban growth boundary proposal, and the next steps. Eugene and Springfield have shared an urban growth boundary and a regional comprehensive plan, the Metro Plan, since 1982. In 2007, the state legislature passed a House Bill 3337 requiring Eugene and Springfield to adopt their own urban growth boundaries and comprehensive plans. And this current planning effort, Envision Eugene, began in 2010. The approach is tailored to the many different kinds of interested groups and people that we've interacted with over the length of the project. We began with a visioning phase where we met in community meetings talking about what values should underpin the eventual urban growth boundary proposal. We used a community resource group convened by our city manager, which included community leaders, representatives from advocacy groups, neighborhoods, business leaders, and commissioners and city representatives. And a lot of groups that were involved in the community resource group had historically had very different viewpoints about how to grow. So the intent with this group was to bring people together and try to forge a common vision for how to grow as a community. The work of the community resource group and other members of the community resulted in a community vision that was approved by our city council in 2012. And this is the map from that document. It focuses new growth in the downtown and near key transportation corridors of Eugene, including West 11th Avenue, Highway 99, River Road, Coburg Road, Franklin Boulevard, and South Willamette. And the vision also promotes the concept of 20-minute neighborhoods, where all Eugene residents can access daily shopping needs and parks and schools within a 20-minute walk of their home. Another product of the community visioning was the 7 pillars of Envision Eugene. And these are the values that are the foundation of all of the work that has come since. They talk about providing ample economic opportunity for everyone, housing affordable to everyone, planning for climate change and energy resiliency, promoting a compact urban development form and efficient transportation options, protecting and repairing our neighborhood livability as well as our natural resources, and providing for an adaptable system that we can adjust over time. After that phase of visioning, there was a phase of deep technical work that we engaged a specialized subgroup of the community resource group, which we called the technical resource group. And these folks spent thousands of hours looking at maps and spreadsheets and analyzing the assumptions and data that underpin the urban growth boundary proposal. From there, we moved into a strategy refinement and outreach phase of work where we engaged in really figuring out how to turn ideas into specific strategies for managing growth. This happened through 2014. That all brings us to where we are in this diagram here. With those phases of visioning, strategy refinement, and measures for looking at expansion options, we have really come to the point of readiness to bring this formal proposal through the adoption process. And so that's where we are, on the brink of the public hearing, which starts in an hour. And then after you make your recommendations to the elected bodies, the final local decision-making is anticipated to happen this summer. Okay, this graph is not legible on the screen. I understand that. But I wanted to point it out to you. It's on a poster in the back of the room. It documents all of the work and the decisions that have been made over time by the Eugene City Council, including adoption of efficiency measures to add more jobs and housing inside our existing urban growth boundary as required by state law before we propose to expand for our unmet needs. So this chart's available in the back of the room for you to look at. We've also been careful to include a lot of public outreach and public information throughout the whole project. We maintain a newsletter and send those out regularly to keep people up to date. We've also used videos and an extensive website to try to get as many people involved in the process as possible. So a little bit about the urban growth boundary adoption process. The process is highly prescribed by Oregon's statewide planning program. There are 19 planning goals, guidelines, and rules and statutes that lay out how the cities are to do their work. One of the overarching goals of the statewide planning program is to preserve farms and forest lands as much as possible and contain urban growth within cities. This is why each city in Oregon is required to have an urban growth boundary and a comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan guides growth consistent with state law and local planning values. This is a simplification of the steps that we went through to figure out how much we needed to add to the urban growth boundary for different kinds of uses. So we went through a process for our employment land supply, that's land for adding jobs to the community, and then a similar process to evaluate our residential or housing needs. The process starts with an inventory of what's in our urban growth boundary as of 2012, the beginning of the planning period. And then the analysis looks at what our needs are 20 years in the future. That's the 2032 demand. And there's a conclusion about what that initial need is. And if there is still a need to accommodate either of those uses, the city is required to look at efficiency measures, which we did, and figured out ways that we could add additional jobs or housing to our urban growth boundary. In the case of employment land, we found a deficit of land in our ability to accommodate all of our needs, and so we have an expansion study in our documents. And that study looks all around the urban growth boundary at where is the appropriate place for the city to grow. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. At the end, we have a 2032 final employment land supply that documents Eugene's ability to meet all of its needs within the urban growth boundary. Same thing happens on the residential side, except at the end of the efficiency measures, Eugene finds that we don't have a need to expand. And so there is no expansion study for that land type. For the types of land we do have a need to expand for, there's a separate study for each type of land. So we have a need to expand for a school site in the Bethel School District, for jobs, for about 3,000 jobs, and for 2 community parks in the Santa Clara and Bethel portions of Eugene. In those studies, we look at how land is categorized by the metro plan around the city of Eugene. And we're required to go through each type of land in order of priority. So the first priority for a city to look at when they have a need to grow is priority 1 land, it's urban reserves. We don't have any currently in Eugene, so you don't see any priority 1 land up on the map. The next priority is priority 2 land, which is land that's already committed to a use other than farm or forest land. So you can see the rust-colored lands like the airport and some rural residential areas that are really the first places that Eugene is required to consider for growing. Next, we look at priority 3 lands, which are lands of marginal farm and forest value. And we have a few of those. And lastly, we look at priority 4, which are active farm and forest lands around the urban growth boundary. The studies that walk through this analysis are located in this binder here and on our website, and break the area down into sub-areas. So there's a series of maps and analysis that walks around the urban growth boundary to come to a conclusion. This is an example of one of the maps in the study that looks at development constraints. It's a closer look with the constraints here shown being steep slopes, special flood hazard areas, protected natural resources, and land devoted to other areas. So that's just an example to show you what the mapping looks like. And the next set of analysis looks at if we aren't going to grow on land that is too constrained, we drop that out of consideration, and that's been grayed out in this map. And then look at what kind of characteristics a piece of land really needs to meet our needs for a certain kind of land use. So in the case of employment land, Eugene's site characteristics are distance from a freight route so that trucks can ship things to and from those employment sites, and the size of the parcel. And so those two are shown on this map. The black areas are over a mile from a freight route, and the little purple areas are too small to meet Eugene's needs for employment land. So again, that's just an example of the series of maps that are contained in the study. You'll also see this map in the study. And what this is a depiction of high-value farmland surrounding Eugene and not high-value farmland shown in yellow. The majority of the area, as you can see, is covered in high-value farmland. And so that is a blessing for us in the Willamette Valley, and also a challenge for us to figure out how to preserve that valuable farmland to the greatest extent possible as we're trying to accommodate our growth needs. The urban growth boundary proposal for Eugene takes great care to minimize the amount of farmland taken into the city for urbanization. Growing in the Clear Lake area allows the city to take in land between the existing city and the airport, and avoids having new urban land immediately adjacent to active farmland. Yeah. So after all of that analysis, the state law's selection process leads Eugene to this conclusion that the UGB should be expanded in the Clear Lake area near the airport and in the Santa Clara area for a community park. That was all about kind of the process that the state sets up for us to come to a conclusion. And now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on what's in the proposal for the urban growth boundary. In the Clear Lake area, the proposal is to provide land for 3,000 jobs for the Bethel area and for the city as a whole, to bring in a community park site of 222 acres, and a future school site for K through 8 grades for the Bethel School District. And future planning in this area will aim to integrate business development with wetland mitigation and a green infrastructure system for the area to accommodate the stormwater. The land uses transition from the Bethel neighborhood northward to the school and park, which are most compatible with the residential area, and then to an area of campus industrial, more like an office park type of character, and then finally to more general industrial closer to the airport. There are commercial services also shown in the gray circles, the gray dotted circles, and some potential locations for road connections in the red dotted lines. Part of our analysis documents different ways that Eugene could accommodate the large sites that it needs. So this is another example map of a series of maps that are in the binders of information that shows potential places where Eugene could cite an employment or a business that needs 50 to 75 acres. There are a series of these maps testing different configurations for different size lots. So that's something that's in the employment land study. In the Clear Lake expansion area, we've proposed a tool known as the Clear Lake Overlay Zone. And the purpose of that overlay zone is twofold. It's to protect those large employment sites from premature division, because the reason they're being brought into the city's urban growth boundary is because they are big and meet our needs for larger employers. And secondly, to address environmental justice issues that have been brought up by our council and community groups in the area concerned about adding more pollution and more industrial activity to a neighborhood that already has a lot of that burden. So those are two elements, two goals of the proposed overlay zone that you could hear testimony about. We have also tested the idea that we can fit 11 large employment sites out here against an analysis of existing wetlands. And so this map shows one possible way that large sites could be accommodated and certain wetland areas could be retained on site, that is avoided. Other areas could be mitigated within the area and restored, and then yet another category of wetlands could be mitigated off-site through a wetland mitigation program, such as the Coyote Prairie picture shown on the slide. So this map is also in the documents that we have here, and you may hear testimony about that. Moving on to parks and schools. I've mentioned the Clear Lake area providing a park and a school site, and the other area to be proposed to be added to the UGB is for a 35-acre park in Santa Clara adjacent to Madison Middle School. And these are areas of the community that are documented as being underserved for parks and schools. The proposal for residential land focuses our future housing needs inside the existing urban growth boundary. So this is a map of Eugene's residential buildable land supply, residential land supply, with the yellow areas shown as vacant and partly vacant land. After accommodating most of our housing needs inside the urban growth boundary, we still found a need to fit in a few more multifamily housing units. And so we've proposed using two strategies to accommodate the final 1,600 homes. And the first is around high-density homes in our downtown. The strategy here is to build on our success with housing downtown using existing tools and programs, and that would accommodate the 1,000-home need for higher density, really tall sorts of apartments and condominiums over the 20-year planning period. There's an example of a proposal that's using the city's recently revamped multiple unit property tax exemption tool, the Olive Lofts. For the medium density housing, there are about 600 homes that we were looking to find a place for. And the proposal that our city council gave us direction to use is to focus on our vacant and partly vacant medium density lands that are already in the city, and focus on the ones that are over a half acre in size and see if we could fit those 600 over the 20 years on those. So that the point of that is to avoid disrupting established neighborhoods or upzone areas if we don't have a need to do that. So we found that we can by increasing the minimum density in our R2 zone from 10 units per acre to 13 units per acre. We can absorb those 600 homes over the 20 years. And all three of these development types shown in the pictures are currently allowed and would still be allowed in the zone. Everything from a single family home on a small lot to a row house or a small apartment building. The UGB package also includes amendments to other plans, including the Metro Plan, the creation of a new Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, adoption and incorporation of the new Eugene 2035 Transportation System Plan, which is currently going through the adoption process. That is a chapter in our comprehensive plan, and amendments to the Public Facilities and Services Plan. The last thing I'd like to mention is that Eugene's proposal includes establishing and then running a growth monitoring program. And this is new for Eugene. It's to implement our 7th pillar about adaptable implementation. And it establishes a database and a large set of different types of data that the city will collect in a standardized way and be able to report on the trends and test that against our assumptions that we're making in this plan. So the first report is due 3 years after acknowledgement of the city's urban growth boundary. And this is all enabled by policies that we've put in the comprehensive plan. The next steps, so we have a 2-step process for local adoption. The first step we're in right now with the city and county planning commissions. We've held a series of work sessions. We have a public hearing tonight, and then each of the planning commissions will deliberate and form a recommendation to their elected body. And then the second step of the process will be with the Eugene City Council and Lane County Board, and they too will have their own work sessions, a public hearing, deliberations, and their final actions. So a general timeline for the next steps is that the Planning Commission deliberations will be taking place in April. Those recommendations should be finalized early May, and then the process would move on to the City Council and Board of Commissioners by late May. You can find project updates on envisioneugene.org, including deliberation dates and live streaming of meetings and all those kinds of things. You can sign up for the newsletter. And that concludes the staff presentation. We now are going to break and have time for the community to ask us questions before the public hearing.
Can I quickly see if there's any questions from the Eugene Planning Commission? Do you have any questions of staff at this point?
Any questions from Lane County Planning Commission? Okay.
Okay, Emily.
So just to address Oregon Public Meetings Law, I'd like you to gavel out of this meeting and then gavel in to another public meeting, a separate public meeting, to start the public hearing at 7. Give staff a little time to prepare for the hearing. I understand there's food for you.
We already ate it.
You guys already ate it. But to the extent that you do want to stay out here and have conversations with folks, that's absolutely fine, but don't have a conversation with a quorum of yourselves, because we're not technically in a public meeting between these two, and we're not recording anything. Make sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to close the work session and then make sure to come back at 7 o'clock for the hearing if you're interested, and we'll gavel in then.
Lane County work session is closed. We'll be back at 7.
Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And it might seem a little less personal, but I'm going to be looking at my paper a lot to make sure that I cover all of the points. Tonight, the Eugene and Lane County Planning Commissions are holding a joint public hearing to consider numerous actions related to adopting a new urban growth boundary for Eugene. The first ordinance establishes Eugene urban growth boundary and adds land for employment, parks, and a school. The second ordinance adopts the land study for housing, which concludes that there is not a need to add land to the UGB for housing. The complete list of actions has been heavily publicized, including during the public work session that preceded this hearing that started at 6. If you are here this evening and would like to speak about one of these actions, please fill out a green form in the back if you have not already, and staff will bring the green form to us so you can speak. As a courteous to all present tonight, if you all can turn off your cell phones or other electronic devices. And I'd also ask you to refrain from any applause, booing, or cheering, so that we can all respect each other's what we're here to share. First, we'd like to explain our role as planning commissioners. We're purely volunteer commissions, or we're a purely volunteer commissions. We are not paid. We all live and work in the community. All of us are appointed directly from elected officials. And we're responsible for upholding the laws of the city, the community, and the state, and the policies of our elected officials. And of course, at the same time, we're responsible to everyone who lives and works here in our community. As planning commissioners, we're committed to balancing all of our needs as a community and to making the best decisions we possibly can based on our policies and our laws for us and for future generations. So I'm going to start by introducing myself, and then each of us will introduce ourselves on each of the commissions. So I'm Kristen Taylor, and I'm currently the chair of the Eugene Planning Commission.
And I'm Bill Randall.
Jeff Mills.
Brianna Nicolella.
Stephen Baker. John Jaworski.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Randy Leddick, chair of the Lane County Planning Commission.
Robert Weeks.
Ryan Sisson.
Dwight Kuhn.
Charles C. Kaler.
Gary Rose.
Larry Thorpe.
Jason Teasfeld.
Great. We also have several staff present. I want to introduce you to tonight before, as you hear from them, you'll know who they are. We have Terry Harding, if you can raise your hand, project manager, Robin Hostick, Eugene Planning Director, Emily Jerome, there we go, Assistant City Attorney, Lane County Staff Mark Rust, the planner, and Lydia McKinney, Lane County Planning Director. We will be conducting, as I said in the beginning, we're going to be conducting a joint public hearing this evening. The planning commissions will not be deliberating or acting tonight. We will deliberate at a later date, and the planning commissions will then be making recommendations to our respected elected officials concerning each ordinance. The city council and county board will then hold another public hearing, and they will make their decision on those proposals. So we're going to begin this evening with a brief overview of the proposal from city staff, of the Eugene planning staff.
Thank you. Before you tonight is a public hearing on two ordinances that the city of Eugene is proposing. The first ordinance would establish Eugene's urban growth boundary and add land for jobs, parks, and a school. And the second ordinance would accommodate the city's 20-year land supply needs for housing. And I've given the presentation, so I don't feel like I need to repeat the details of the proposal.
Perfect. We'll begin our consideration of the Eugene Urban Growth Boundary Proposal by opening up the public hearing. I'd like to open up the public hearing on behalf of the Eugene Planning Commission. Given the volume of people, we have at this point about 17 people. And like I said, if you haven't filled out a green form and you'd like to, make sure you do and bring that up and give it to staff. We're going to allow people to speak for 5 minutes, and we'll let you know when your 5 minutes is up. And when you come up, if you can please state your name and your address before beginning your testimony. As a courtesy to all here tonight, we ask that you please, like I said, cease your time after the 5 minutes. And we encourage you to submit written testimony. And as we said, we're not the decision-making bodies. So if you don't get everything in tonight and you want another opportunity to attend a hearing, provide public testimony, provide it please to the elected officials.
The county's public hearing is now open.
Okay. Ready.
Okay, the first person that I have on the list is Cindy Allen, and she will be followed by Chris Greco. Cindy Allen. Okay, we'll come back to her. Chris Greco.
Is this on? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I don't think I'll need 5 minutes. I hope I don't take 5 minutes. I really haven't come to address the board in any sense of asking you to do anything specific, because the specifics, quite honestly, are beyond my expertise. I really came here as a citizen, as a personal example, tell you a little bit about my experience in my 10 years I've been in Oregon, and hopefully give you some ammunition and some motivation and some information that may motivate you in terms of your interaction with the state of Oregon. So first I'll just start with some really basic stats. I did a little research on the web a month or two ago, and I found out that Oregon is the third highest, most rent-burdened state in America. I don't remember who's number 2 and who's number 1. I think 1 might be Hawaii, which is an island, and Oregon's number 3. And in my opinion, and based on my experience in the 10 years I've lived here, that shortage is a direct result of the state land use laws. And that opinion is based upon the 8 or so years, or 9 years that I lived in Deschutes County. Prior to that, I lived in Bozeman, Montana for 10 years, and prior to that, Austin, Texas. Prior to that, Asheville, North Carolina. Prior to that, Cleveland, Ohio. Prior to that, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Prior to that, Battle Creek. My father worked for Kellogg's, and Tony the Tiger used to come to our house for dinner quite a bit when I was a boy. So my point here is that in all those places I lived, we never had any trouble finding anywhere to live. And I came to Deschutes County in 2006, and I was a tenant in a house for 8 years and paid my rent on time, and I came home from work one day about 4 years ago to find an eviction notice on my door. And the out-of-state homeowners had not been making their payments, and they'd been spending my rent doing something else. And so I discovered I was going to have to leave. There was literally nowhere to go. Deschutes County right now has a 0.4% vacancy rate. And so while I was looking for a place to live, I was reading newspaper articles, and I was discovering that the state had forbid Bend to increase its urban growth boundary. And I was sitting there going, well, now I know why I can't find an apartment. And eventually I was evicted and had to leave. I put up quite a fight with Fannie Mae and lost. And I moved in with a very kindly neighbor, my 96-year-old neighbor, and stayed with her for what I thought was going to be a week or two. Ended up being close to a year. And during that year, I actually thought about going into a homeless shelter. I talked to a manager at the Bethlehem Inn. And I had a job that I really liked. I worked at Aubrey Glen Golf Club. I worked with some fantastic people, some of the best people I've ever worked with anywhere in America. And it wasn't a high-paying job, but I couldn't find anywhere to stay. I went to talk to the Bethlehem Inn. That manager informed me that she had working families living in her homeless shelter with 2 incomes, savings accounts, children, couldn't find anywhere to live. That really affected me because I asked myself, I thought about my childhood, and I thought about my father going to work at Kellogg's and the little neighborhood that I grew up in. And I said to myself, what's happening to the self-esteem of the children in those families whose parents can't find anywhere to live, not because they're lazy, not because they're unemployed, not because they're drug addicts or drunks, but because there's simply nowhere to go. And why is there nowhere to go? Because the state of Oregon has an arbitrary value judgment based on the land use laws passed in 1976, where they said high-value farmland and forest land must be preserved. I'm all for that. I'm not an anti-environmentalist. I'm not an anti-government person. But when you have children growing up in homeless shelters whose parents have jobs, clearly you're behind the curve. Clearly your laws need to be revisited. And who am I? I'm just one little guy. And so, I wanted to come here tonight and just talk about this for a bit. Right now in Eugene, you have a 2% vacancy rate. The difference between 0.4% and 2% is negligible if you're trying to find an apartment. So I've been here now 8 months. I'm renting a room. I'm 61 years old. I was a piano performance major at the University of North Carolina. I own a 1917 Steinway grand piano that's been in storage for a year and a half. I can't afford to get it out of storage. I don't want to lose it. I sneak over to the university over here and sneak into the music department at night and try to keep my chops from going completely to hell while I try to figure out how I'm going to get enough money and find a place I can afford to live that is enough room for a small grant. And so what I would like you to know is that when I heard this tonight, that there's no need for housing in this plan, that I read something in the paper, and I tried to find the article, but I lost the bookmark somehow, that there didn't seem to be adequate provision for housing in the plan that you're proposing to the state of Oregon. It's not going to come from the top down. The state of Oregon is, are we done?
Yeah, we're done. So
Okay.
wrap it up in a sentence.
Yeah, the state of Oregon is not going to get it. It's going to have to come from people like you. They're going to have to hear. You're going to have to go up there and tell them, look, we've got citizens down in our town who are having a very difficult time carrying on a reasonable life here. And your land use laws haven't been revisited since 1976. And I just want to encourage you, give you a little bit of personal testimony that I hope will be visceral enough that it may motivate you and make you feel that what you're doing is worthwhile in making that effort. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Mr. Greco, before you sit down, could you, for the record, just state your name and address, please?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Chris Greco. I live at 2565 Van Ness Street in Eugene.
Thank you.
You bet.
Next is Cindy Allen.
Cindy Allen, 858 Fox Glen. I'm so very glad the last man just spoke. Springfield is annexing land for their 20-year analysis. Eugene is proposing zero change in the UGB for housing and only infill on existing land. I think some extension of the UGB will be necessary and very needed for housing. Just to give you a little history, South Willamette neighbors organized after they realized how far-reaching over 80 pages of complicated rezoning changes, SWAZI, would be to their area. Affected neighborhood associations also voted against it. The neighbors of Good Pasture have also objected to rezoning that they feel is too much for an already congested area, and there are lawsuits regarding infill development at Oakley Lane. I'm sure we all remember last year, especially on Willamette, there were stop forced rezonings up for several months, and I've heard they're in storage, but still available. Infill does have its problems. Unfortunately, the corporate world has found our city. When Eugene's largest property manager was indicted, we learned that the owners of his more than 500 plus properties were from throughout the country and the world. No one minds reasonable development, but massive changes to long-established neighborhoods, loss of reasonably priced housing, displacement of people, loss of gardens and solar access, and more gridlock on capacity streets that were never designed to have such high traffic. Cars or bikes are the result of too much infill. Stack and pack housing projects owned by the wealthy, with ever-increasing rent and no equity for renters. In South Eugene, the area that I'm most familiar with, there are only 2 vertical access streets for hundreds of people. Willamette and Hilliard are already at capacity. They are also the major corridors for emergency services. Will the fire department and first responders be contacted to the safety of the large development changes planned for both Willamette and Hilliard? Recently, a $22 million, 5-story, 117 apartments and commercial area was proposed for Hilliard, right off the corner, a bottleneck in an area already having gridlock and significant traffic issues. The C2 zoning of the property is over 50 years old. And the way that everything has grown, it's surrounded by R1 single-family homes. Residents sent in hundreds of pages of comments regarding their concerns about the size of the complex, the many traffic challenges that already exist in the area, concerns about loss of property value to their homes, spillover traffic to quiet residential streets, etc. The safety of the crosswalk over 30th at Outer, a street with a designated bike path right next to the property and used by students, especially those from the 4 elementary schools, was also questioned. I was very surprised how few, vague, and limited in scope the traffic and parking regulations were on a project of this size. Thank you.
Next is Pat McGilvery, followed by Bill Aspergren.
Pat McGilvery, 3464 Breezewood Avenue in Eugene. Good evening, Commission members, and thank you for your time this evening. I will be brief. I am the Community Relations Director for Bethel School District. It might be helpful for us to share some insight with you about Bethel's interest in an expanded UGB. We like to think of ourselves as a school district that plans for the future, and it turns out it may be an inherited trait, because back in 1964, the school board then began purchasing small parcels of land, which was then out in the boondocks, way outside the UGB. The last purchase of those small pieces ended in 1992, and over the years, the board managed to accumulate about 80 contiguous acres for a future school site. Today, Terry Street is a collector street that dead ends at our school district property to the north. And our property is now adjacent to hundreds of homes in established neighborhoods. Should the UGB be expanded, the district property would eventually be next to a city park, and even the most forward-thinking school board members could not have imagined that back in 1964. The school district's long-range plan clearly indicates that Bethel will be needing that school site because of the homes that are currently being built west of Beltline, and are continuing, the plans continue for more homes to be built there. as well as in the north part of our district near the Northwest Expressway. And we also serve families who live in the community of Alvador, which you know is well outside the UGB. Bethel School District has been a part of the Envision Eugene process from the beginning, from the group's first meeting several years ago. And the district is now asking that only 54 acres, not all 80, but only 54 of its 80 acres be included in an expanded UGB. This would be enough to support any kind of school, and it would also allow us to preserve some of the wetlands that are part of our 80 acres. We do not plan to build a new school immediately, but the district must continue planning for the future, and you are helping us do that. And knowing that our future school site is within an expanded UGB will be significant for Bethel School District, its students, and its families. And finally, it's not going to make your task any easier, but as volunteers on this commission, I just want to personally thank you for the service that you're providing, because the decisions you are making will directly impact the livability of the people of Eugene and in our surrounding community for decades to come. And for that, I thank you.
Next is Bill Aspergren, followed by Misty Frost.
Hi, I'm Bill Aspergren, 1939 Alder Street here in Eugene. My comments are not aimed at Ordinance 1 or the proposed UGB expansion. Rather, my concerns are that Ordinance 2 is based on incorrect data and assumptions, and if approved, will result in changes to policies, zoning, and code that will have a negative impact on neighborhoods. I've submitted written testimony which relates to multifamily housing projections. My conclusions are primarily based on research and analysis done by Lloyd Hellickson, and he has also submitted written testimony. Ordinance 2's proposed plan is based on a flawed process that created incorrect buildable land inventory. The incorrect data, along with wrong assumptions, were used as input to the land model, which produced questionable results. For example, the model indicated there's a land deficit of 1,600 multifamily dwelling units. Lloyd's research shows this is absolutely not true. However, staff has recommended unneeded policy changes in Ordinance 2 to deal with the 1,600 deficit. The research shows since the planned start date, July 1, 2012, 77% of the 6,800 multifamily dwelling units Eugene needs over the next 20 years have already been built or are under construction. The land model is not even close to reality. It's only 5 years old, and we've got 77% of the multifamily units built out. Let's see. The plan presented in Ordinance 2 has many problems. It's not timely, and it would be a mistake to use it as a basis for policy decisions, zone and code changes that may harm the community. These problems and others were brought to the staff's attention over a year ago, and no action was taken to verify or fix the problems. Instead, to compensate for the problems, staff said in the Sunday's Register Guard that they were anxious to get the adoption of the boundary done so they can, quote, and I quote this, launch a growth monitoring program, for example, to track development in Eugene to see whether the planner's assumptions were correct and provide data to city leaders so city leaders can make adjustments, including expanding the boundary if needed. And they also said the first report is due 3 years after the state approves the new boundary. 3 years, that's a long time. We already know that the data and assumptions used to create the current projection are wrong. There's no reason to make policy changes now based on incorrect information and then wait 3 years to fix the mess. Please reject the ordinance number 2 and ask that the data and assumptions are corrected to better reflect reality. Do not accept excuses why these elements cannot be changed. Above all, do not allow any changes to policies, code, or zoning based on this proposal. Thanks.
Thank you. Misty Frost, followed by Eliza Kaczynski.
Good evening. My name is Misty Frost, and I reside at 1610 Doherty Avenue, Cottage Grove, Oregon. And I am the Environmental Justice Community Organizer for Beyond Toxics. And we would like to thank you for your hard work and diligence for incorporating ideas like environmental justice into this plan. I would like to personally suggest and ask you to remember that West Eugene is in lack of grocery stores, medical facilities, and trees. When it comes down to making decisions on who goes where in these new properties, I would like to hope that you would give the opportunities to health food stores instead of fast food and convenience stores, and medical facilities and grocery stores with healthy foods. But thank you very much for all of your help and your very thoughtful planning in this.
Thank you. Eliza Kaczynski, followed by Home Builders of Lane County, represented by Bill Close.
Hello, I'm Eliza Kaczynski. I live at 925 West Broadway in Eugene, and I'm a representative from the Walkable Eugene Citizens Advisory Committee Network, or WeCan, which is an ad hoc citizens group. We support not expanding the UGB for housing. Envision Eugene has 7 pillars widely supported by the community. These include providing housing affordable to all income levels, promoting compact urban development and efficient transportation options, planning for climate change, and protecting our natural resources. The community has already decided that it wants to protect farm and forest land and that it supports the 7 pillars of Eugene, including compact growth along transit corridors and walkable 20-minute neighborhoods. It's about our future, not just for now, but for our children and our children's children, what we want Eugene to look like in 20 years. We can find the balance between these pillars. The whole point of an urban growth boundary from a city's perspective is to avoid the expense of expanding infrastructure out to sprawling new neighborhoods. Our growth plan needs to be affordable to taxpayers and homeowners both. Most households' 2 biggest expenses are housing and transportation. If you save a little money on housing by spending a lot more year after year on transportation, you haven't achieved affordability. There are many types of housing that can be affordable but are underrepresented in Eugene. Some might say that they are missing. These include accessory dwelling units, and also known as backyard cottages, cottage clusters, row houses, and many other types along these lines. It makes a lot more sense to expand our housing vocabulary than our UGB, and to continue to work to find ways to make compatible, sustainable infill a reality in Eugene. Several local developments show that adding housing along the lines of Envision Eugene can be done successfully, even in the most expensive and vocal parts of town, and without subsidies. This adds to the supply of housing, which gradually helps control prices. We need to figure out how to promote and ease the process of building this kind of housing. Our housing affordability problem can be addressed by increasing our ability to increase supply within the UGB. I urge the Planning Commission to continue to help us find the balance between the 7 pillars of Envision Eugene. Support housing affordability, compact urban development, and transportation options, while also protecting our natural resources, planning for climate change, and the other things that we value in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Close, representing the Home Builders Association of Lane County.
Commissioners, Bill Close with the Home Builders, 375 West 4th Street, Suite 204 in Eugene. If I say I or we, getting a little too personal with my client. I tend to do that. Want to get excited, but I'm talking tonight on behalf of the home builders. We, home builders, have been had both legs in the envision process since it started in 2008. So here we are, 8 years in. I couldn't begin to count the hours, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. I think major contributions. The envision process is actually using some documents the home builders generated. There are two categories of issues the home builders has. One is expanding the urban growth boundary. I'm not going to talk about that. The other issue is fixing the code. I was struggling with, how to, without getting into gory detail in 5 minutes, I was struggling with how to characterize how the home builders views the current code. And I came up with the little note on my email to Ed McMahon there, that I sense that the code that we've had in place since 2001 is generally hostile towards affordable housing. I don't say that casually, because I've been making a living off that hostile code for, well, ever since 2001 when it was adopted. So I'm familiar with its ins and outs. As they say on TV, I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. With the idea of just trying to give you some general categories of problems that we see with the code, I listed, made a short list on that email that I sent my client, Ed McMahon. And so I'm going to just hit these very quickly if I can. Any one of these categories, there are a number of examples of problems with the code. I could, on any of these categories, I could give you examples lasting from 2 minutes to 2 hours, but I have probably 3 minutes left. So in that list, first complaint, it's a kind of problem, leveraging housing developers into discretionary processes where it's easy for the city to say no to repeated applications for the same site. State law says you're supposed to be able to develop under clear and objective standards. State law, when you file your application, you know whether or not you're going to get an approval. Not in Eugene. Eugene's code pushes you into discretionary standards where the issue comes down to compatibility. Second list item, failure to afford housing developers a simple path to housing approval under clear and objective standards as required by state law. So there are duplicative processes. You have to go through multiple serial processes instead of one. Adds time, cost, contrary to state law. Third item, code language that punishes housing developers with vastly reduced density if they ask for housing development rights guaranteed by state law. Hard to believe? It's true. Happens right here in Eugene. For example, the vision anticipates collating thousands of more units into, maybe thousands more people, into the South Hills in little tiny open spaces. We all know it's not going to happen. But above 900 feet, they're positing an awful lot of houses. But that's only if you file under the discretionary standards. You file your application, you ask permission from the city, and the city has to determine whether the use is compatible or whatever the other long list of discretionary standards is. If you have the temerity to invoke your rights under state law and ask for clear and objective standards, this code allows you 1 unit per legal lot. So, for example, I'm connected with an application that was recently filed, 13 acres. 5 units per acre is the amount allowed by the code. If you file under discretionary standards, which would be 13 acres times be about 65 units. But if you file under the needed housing standards, you're allowed 1 unit per legal lot, existing legal lot. And on this particular site, because you're not allowed to grade slopes that are 20% or steeper, you can't get to that vacant legal lot. There's 1 legal lot on the site. Above 900 feet, you can't get to it because you're not allowed to grade 20% slope. So here is a client of mine who is applied under the discretionary standards for 37 units, because if he files under the needed housing standards and invokes his rights, statutory rights to clear and objective standards, he gets 0 houses. That's really broken. Fuzzy plan boundaries. I am shocked. I'm flabbergasted that we're this far down the road, 8 years, and the city's not proposing to adopt a comprehensive plan map that's parcel specific. 30 seconds. 8 years ago, one of the 3 things the home builders asked the city for was give us a comprehensive plan map that's parcel specific. So when somebody asks for zoning that they're entitled to, they know where to draw the line. City says, sure, don't worry about it. Promises, promises, promises. It wasn't until this package hit this street just in the last few weeks that I got it that we're not going to get the parcel specific metro plan diagram. I've recently finished, it's almost finished, a rezoning application that started in 2011, just asking for zoning that the owner was entitled to. And the plan boundary went through the property somewhere, a fuzzy metro plan boundary. That application has been to LUBA twice and been to the hearings official 3 times over a period of 6 years now. And the city's almost got that line drawn. That doesn't involve building houses. That's just trying to figure out where your zoning is. That could be solved with a parcel-specific metro plan diagram like all the competent cities in the valley have. And after 8 years of promises, we're not going to get it.
Bill?
I'm done. So I have a few more exciting items on the list there. You can read them yourself, but it's just a start. Thank you for letting me have more than 5 minutes.
You're also next on the list for Eugene Sand and Gravel.
I need to change my demeanor completely.
So
hold tight. Let me get my material.
If you could also restate your name and address this time, that would be appreciated.
Intentionally filled out 2 separate cards and tried to get them shuffled so I wouldn't have to do 2 presentations back to back because I really have to change who I am. Now I have to be a nice guy.
We could shift the order if you want, seriously.
No, it's okay. I'm here.
Okay.
This one's going to be short and much more friendly. This relates to the industrial ordinance. I have a 5-page letter. The most recent submission is a 5-page letter explaining to the commissioners why the first pick of all the property that to add to the urban growth boundary for industrial has to be the 35 acres that is adjacent to the west side of the Delta shops. You know where all that is out there, the county buildings out in the Delta, and north of Beltline and south of that giant big pond that's near the golf course. So it's 35 acres that's between the county shops and the river. We have, over the last 3 years, given the city hundreds of pages of stuff related to this. And so the most recent 5-page letter references all that. And in one of those documents somewhere is this little color graphic I have handed out to you right here, which shows the property. There you see Delta Highway running where it runs. Adjacent to the west side, you see the county building complex. We're talking about the several legal lots that are adjacent to the west. You see a 13.7 acre parcel, 11.9 acre parcel, 3.4 acre parcel, and then there's a smaller one hiding in 2.0 up to the north. About 35 acres, give or take, on the river. That property is worked over Goal 5 aggregate land. It's been reclaimed. It's zoned for sand and gravel use, I believe. With the exception of a little smidge that's zoned for industrial. That property, as we understand it under state law, comes in the category of non-resource land. And non-resource land has to be the first pick in this list of statutory priorities when you start asking what land should we add for industrial use. We've been trying to get the city's attention on this for 3 years. They're not listening. The city takes the view that Goal 5 land is resource land. Therefore, it goes to the bottom of the list. And we're trying to get the city's attention and get them to agree that, no, when you look at the definitions in the Oregon Revised, in the administrative rules of the LCDC and the case law, it's correct to say that Goal 5 land is non-resource land. The definition of resource land is limited to Goals 3 and 4, forestry and ag, trees and cows. But not worked over Goal 5 land. So if we're correct about this, and it's strictly a legal question, then this 35 acres has to come in first, because that's what the statutory priorities say. It's a nice piece of ground, as you can see. If you bring that in, you could bring in all that. You can bring in about 130 acres to the north and south, all along the river. It'd be a great place to extend the bike path up to the edge of the UGB, past the golf course, and so on. Anyway, I'm just trying to give you a feel for the context. But To recap, this is a strictly legal question, and it boils down to what is the definition, what's in the bucket for purposes of the statutory priorities, the bucket that's labeled non-resource land, and we think it includes this one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Michael Reeder, followed by Scott Lindstrom.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Mike Reeder, 800 Willamette Street, Suite 800. I'm a land use attorney with the firm Arnold Gallagher in Eugene. I also teach the land use class at the University of Oregon School of Law, and I've done that since 2013. I come to you tonight representing Joe Gagne III and the Gagne family partners, who own over 205 acres of vacant property outside the urban growth boundary in West Eugene near the Hynex plant. They also own 77 acres of property that's inside the city of Eugene and within the urban growth boundary. My clients were supportive of the city of Eugene's redesignation process that happened a few years ago, where a fair amount of property in West Eugene, the Crow Road area, was redesignated from medium density residential to low density residential. And one of the reasons why my client was interested in doing that was because it fit nicely into my client's master plan for that area. Before the proposal that's before you tonight for housing was on the table, there was a proposal for a modest expansion for single family residential housing. And at that time, there were 4 study areas in consideration, and my client's property was one of those 4 areas for consideration. I'm here before you tonight to keep that property on your radar, and also to keep you in the loop in regards to the urban reserve planning process. One of the reasons why the city one of the things that we did is we agreed with the city that we would not object to the process that we're going through at this time, because there was the option that the city of Eugene would fund the urban reserve planning process, and that the city has set aside $750,000 to do that planning. Urban reserve planning is important because it allows the city to plan for the next 50 years. It also allows the city to take a breather and do some monitoring and look at the trends that are happening for single-family, multifamily housing, and to plan accordingly. And we're supportive of those efforts. So I wanted to bring your attention tonight the fact that my client is supportive of the city's effort to do urban reserve planning, regardless of what ultimately comes out in the wash as part of this process, whether or not the urban growth boundary is expanded for single-family residential for housing or not, whether that's kicked down the road for a few years. My client has no opinion, but my client is interested in that urban reserve planning process that will allow the city to do a more comprehensive planning process. And what it does essentially is that type of planning allows for the city to look at infrastructure and amortize those infrastructure costs that are associated with expansion of the urban growth boundary. I want to echo the comments of our first speaker tonight. I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of what he says in regards to the impact that an overly restricted urban growth boundary has on housing affordability. That is a big, big problem that the city of Eugene has to struggle with, as does the city or the state of Oregon. What I want to call your attention to is a statement made by Arnold Kogan. Arnold Kogan was the state of Oregon's first director of the Department of Land Conservation and Development. He was Tom McCall's right-hand man. And crafted Senate Bill 10, which was the precursor to Senate Bill 100, which is what gave us our current land use system. And this is what he said. He said, "I can assure you that UGBs were never," and he emphasized never, "meant to be static and unchanging. Neither were they intended to prohibit or discourage growth. Instead, their purpose was to accommodate urbanization and employment while conserving resources. No growth is not an option. Smart managed growth is. Arbitrary efforts to constrain or reduce expansion of future economic growth is not in keeping with the spirit of Senate Bill 100 or the intent of Goal 14. On July 20th, 2016, Ed Moore, the DLCD field rep for this area, when asked a direct question from City Councilor Clark, when Councilor Clark asked whether it was within keeping the spirit of good, intelligent land use planning to not move the UGB for housing for 50 years, he stated, based on the information I've had, I'd say at this point, no, it is not. I emphasize these points because the fight about whether or not to expand the urban growth boundary for housing now or say 3 years in the future, there's going to be a fight now or in the future. So I want you to be aware of the standards in place, because you will hear a lot of talk about protecting farm and forest. Oregon does a very good job of protecting farm and forest. Now it's time for the city of Eugene to address housing affordability, and you can only do that in this particular case by expanding the urban growth boundary. And I thank you for your time.
Next is Scott Lindstrom, followed by Chris Hayes.
Good evening. My name is Scott Lindstrom. My address is 2600 Highway 99 North. I'm the COO for Jerry's Home Improvement Center. And our issue is actually quite simple. We have our store on Highway 99 exits to the north on a street shown on the graph on the video up there as a street called Theona. Your plan that shows the traffic from the expansion south of the airport is going to be dumping into Theona and creating an enlargement of that road, which currently is just a 2-lane country road. Our concern right now is northbound traffic getting out of our store is nearly impossible. And if anybody shops our store and goes northbound, it takes forever to get out and go northbound. And I've been at Jerry's 32 years, and I can tell you the amount of traffic accidents. There's been people killed, and I've been the first person on that those traffic scenes many times. And our concern is for safety. And I guess the only question I'm really asking right now, has the commission considered the increased traffic onto Theona under the Oregon Planning Goal 12? And that is my only question. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris Hayes, followed by Carlene Riley.
Hello. Chris Hayes, 1150 Darlene Lane. My only question is, what percentage of the new parks that are being planned, I believe it was 35 acres out River Road and 222 acres in the Clear Lake region area, are actually going to be designated for dog parks? In Eugene right now, we already have over 80 parks that are, we're having a pretty rough time managing, and there's only 7 dog parks in the Eugene city limits, if you will. They're rather small, most of them. 2 of them are pretty nice sized. And I feel like having 35 acres for a community park at the north end of River Road seems like a bit of a waste. Eugene is a very dog friendly town, and I'd like to see it continue. That's really all I have to say today.
Thank you. Carlene Riley, followed by Linda Lynch.
It's really nice to have both planning committees here, because I'm Carlene Riley and I live in the River Road area and have been working with Santa Clara, and we have that mix of River Road city properties and Santa Clara county properties, and it's a difficult thing to work with. Carlene Riley, 395 Marion Lane, Eugene, 97404. Envision Eugene began in 2010, and it changed my life. Former adversaries became allies, and knowledge about land use, housing, and transportation fleshed out empty phrases. In the process, I met neighbors with long-standing residency and newcomers. With the culmination of work to expand the urban growth boundary, excitement in our River Road and Santa Clara neighborhoods is mounting. We are grateful for funding of our neighborhood planning and glad to have stable staffing for this effort. Santa Clara will acquire much needed park property for a community center, which they do not have. We are looking forward to melding land use and transportation. We are envisioning a neighborhood that includes 20-minute shopping areas. Increased density would help build community, allow us to support commercial areas with a natural food store, bakeries, coffee shops, bike sales and repairs, and purchase our basic goods and services. We also want that walk to be safe. Vision Zero is a welcome idea that we can strive for. This scenario will reduce vehicle miles traveled, saving us gasoline and improve air quality by reducing emissions. Increased routes by LTD and MX will help us build community, reduce VMT and air emissions, and provide us access to a larger commercial and employment area. 7 years is really quite enough to grasp the basic ideas of Envision Eugene, lay out the housing needs and strategies, provide neighborhood parks, indicate industrial land for jobs for our new neighbors, and integrate everything with transportation options. The hang-up seems to be around density. My preference is to utilize land within the UGB to build housing for newcomers. Increased density along River Road will ensure that we support public transit, shops, and services. I prefer to protect our agricultural land by building more densely within the UGB. My friends and I are seeking more modest homes or apartments, less expensive and smaller in square footage. We welcome the idea of living more simply, leaving us time to engage in social, civic, and recreational activities. It is time to get on with the adoption of the proposed expansion of the UGB and allow neighborhoods to undertake planning efforts. Just as a postscript, I take inspiration from Giles Tremlett, who wrote Ghosts of Spain. He wrote, Spaniards like the warmth, the solidarity, the sense of belonging that groups give them. That's perhaps is why their towns and cities pack people together, ignoring the acres of open space around them. I gave you the rest of the PS on your transcript. I'm looking to build community. I'm not wanting to build so far apart that I can't touch out to my neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Lynch, followed by Sue Pritchard.
Hi, good evening. I'm Linda Lynch. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Lane County. Our address is 338 West 11th, Suite 101 in Eugene. We have submitted written testimony, but I just kind of wanted to tell you what that said in case it didn't get read. We have followed the process, the Envision Eugene process, throughout its entirety, and in fact, we have testified 9 separate times on the process. So at this point, we urge you to complete the process and recommend adoption of Ordinance 1 and Ordinance 2 to your elected officials body. We'd also like to comment a little bit on the process. We're the League of Women Voters. We believe in citizen engagement in government, and we've been very impressed with the process that the City of Eugene has had around Envision Eugene. Workshops, open houses, surveys, online surveys. The staff has been highly accessible to us and been willing to meet on a variety of topics at a variety of times, and we've been impressed with the whole process. So thank you very much about that. Again, we would just urge you to complete the process so that the things that our previous speaker mentioned can begin. So as she said, it's time to get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue Pritchard, followed by Mia Nelson.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is Sue Pritchard. I live at 2671 Emerald Street in Eugene. I'm a licensed commercial real estate broker, mostly retired, and have spent the last 39 years working in both residential and commercial real estate in Eugene. I'm here to encourage you to support adoption of both of the ordinances before you tonight. In 2010, along with 50 or 60 other Eugene citizens, I was invited to participate in Community Resource Group. That was a group formed by our city manager to create a new and inclusive way for our community to talk about how we manage growth. It was a topic that in the past had been fraught with contentious and hostile debate. Out of this successful inclusive process, the Technical Resource Group was formed to verify data, flush out assumptions, and review all of the work leading up to this point that was done by city staff. Along with Sean Bowles, I co-chaired that Technical Resource Group from the beginning until we completed our work last year, which was nearly 7 years later. The composition of the TRG, the Technical Resource Group, was intentionally broad-based. Our task was to ensure that the information upon which staff recommendations were made was sound and thoroughly vetted. This is the time to move forward on these ordinances. The process getting to this point has been exemplary. Out of the Community Resource Group, the 7 pillars were created to ensure that the community values were not lost in the analysis. The public engagement process had been relentless and performed to the highest standards. Newsletters, neighborhood presentations, a detailed and constantly updated website, open houses, online surveys. All of these efforts by city staff to ensure that the public was involved have been outstanding in both quality and quantity. And the staff's generous and gracious manner throughout this public engagement process is unprecedented in my experience. While the TRG was not tasked with making unanimous recommendations, either to the staff or to the City Council, we are united in seeing the critical role of Pillar 7, the monitoring pillar. To arrive at the recommended ordinances, assumptions had to be made, and as always with assumptions, even when they're made on the best data possible and available at that time, sometimes they're right and sometimes they're questionable. We won't know whether assumptions about housing mix and household size and redevelopment rates are correct until we put the ordinances in place and get busy monitoring what is actually happening out there in the community today. Monitoring and making course corrections is a critical part of why we must move forward adopting these ordinances now. 7 years, thousands of hours of staff time, hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer time, an exemplary public engagement process have culminated in 2 very sound, well-researched, thoroughly vetted ordinances that embody the larger community values. It's time to put them in place so that we can get on with other important projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mia Nelson, followed by Larry Banks.
Good evening, I'm Mia Nelson. I represent 1,000 Friends of Oregon. We are a statewide nonprofit organization. We have several hundred Eugene members. My mailing address here is P.O. Box 51252, and that's 97405 in Eugene. I was going to talk about the letter that I handed out. It's about your industrial part of the proposal, and the letter talks about our objections to the proposed code. It also has solutions. We don't believe that the code adequately protects those large lots in perpetuity for the purpose that they were brought into the UGB for. I believe that staff and I will be able to come up with some ideas for resolving our concerns. And I'm not going to talk about it during this 5 minutes. Instead, I just have to say some things in defense of UGBs and talk about what I think Eugene's real problems are with affordable housing. First, just a few observations. The comment was made that Eugene has seen 75% of its projected multifamily built in the first 5 years of the 20-year period. To me, that doesn't indicate that we've met the multifamily need and we can all relax and go home. It means that the projected amount of multifamily as a percentage of what's needed was underestimated. The proposal says that only 45% of all housing units will be multifamily. I objected to that the whole time. I thought it was much too low. And to me, the fact that so much more multifamily is being built than single family just backs that up. If anything is wrong, we're under planning for multifamily. Also, I just wanted to share a factoid that not many people know. When Eugene's UGB was established originally, it was supposed to contain a 20-year supply of land. That was back in 1980. Their forecast at the time was so ambitious that it projected that Eugene would add over 100,000 people in 20 years. We're not actually projected to meet the population our UGB was originally based on, that we were supposed to reach in 2000, until 2030. So that's why we haven't had to expand the UGB for 50 years, because it was never established as a 20-year UGB. It was accidentally established as a supersized 50-year UGB. So that's just a fact. About affordable housing is something everyone cares about. It's so easy to blame it on a line on the map that's holding everyone back. It would be great if it was that simple, because we can just erase the line and move it. There have actually been quite a bit of study done to look at this very question. Does something like an urban growth boundary lead to higher housing prices? And it doesn't. What leads to higher housing prices is a combination of a growth boundary like that and a refusal to accommodate growth inside the UGB by providing capacity. That's what we really need, is capacity to build. That's not just raw land, and it's not even the best provided as raw land. It means capacity means a way that builders can create more housing, a place to do it, a code that allows it, and a financially feasible way to do it. Eugene's problem is that every place that they have looked to expand onto, and even some places that are already inside the UGB, are cost prohibitive to develop. The estimates that I saw for the expansion areas were on the order of $45,000 to $95,000 per single family lot. That's for backbone infrastructure, not including local streets and utilities. That is not affordable by any stretch. And then the land that is affordable inside the UGB, the code is making it so hard to develop that we're not seeing the capacity there either. Now, many of you know that Thousand Friends and the home builders are almost sworn enemies on many topics, but there's one thing that I have to agree with what was said tonight by Mr. Close. I agree with him on the Eugene Code. I think that it needs to be revised. There are many examples of how it discourages the provision of affordable housing, and that doesn't need to happen. But to believe that those problems go away by just blowing out the UGB, it just isn't true. And I'll give you an example of another city that thought it could solve its problems with the UGB expansion. It was Hillsborough. You may have read about this in the newspaper. They decided to do a UGB expansion. The same things were said. We need this for affordable housing. That's why we're doing this. Well, when the bills came due and they found out what it was going to cost to do the infrastructure, the SDCs are going to be $45,000 was the last estimate I heard for per single family house to do it. And now they're saying, well, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to provide affordable housing. It wasn't the line on the map. It was simple cost of infrastructure. And you already have, like I said, there are places in Eugene, they're already in the UGB. They can't be cost effectively served. And until those things are fixed, there's no point in talking about a UGB expansion because that's not really the problem. You have so much capacity and land already inside the UGB. You've paid for the infrastructure. Things like secondary dwelling units, alley access lots, infill and redevelopment, those don't cost anything for infrastructure compared to what it costs to do a greenfield expansion. They're not costing you $90,000 per housing unit, that's for sure. And so I just encourage you to not, buy into this concept that your problems will go away if you just move a line on a map. They won't. Thanks.
Thank you. Larry Banks, followed by Ed McMahon.
Hello, I am Larry Banks, 1982 Charlton Street, Eugene. And I'm here tonight, I guess, with a few hats. One of them is I'm a native Californian, and I'll admit it to you all tonight. And so I've seen sprawl, and I've lived sprawl, and I vow to never never invite that into my world again. And I appreciate the beautiful country that we live in, and our clean air and our clean water and our farmland and everything else. And you look at the map. But I think that the way that map is configured, there's room there to move. There's room there to have an expanded UGB without destroying our livability and without sacrificing to this notion of sprawl. Wouldn't happen very often, but I think that it's okay. My other hat tonight is I was also a member of the Envision Eugene Community Resource Group and one of the subcommittees. And I'll echo some of the previous comments. What an amazing effort. What an amazing amount of time and energy and coming together and listening to 70 different points of view. No outcome of that is going to please everybody. Everybody will have a bone to pick with something, but I think we got far. We're balancing the needs of the community, which is what Kristen said at the start of the meeting, that you are all about also. And I have lost track of a lot of the details that have transpired since the CRG met, but I trust staff's work and work with the TRG and work with other interest groups and experts to craft the right next steps forward. So I support a lot of the work that they're doing. My third hat is I am chair of the Local Government Affairs Council of the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. For a long time, I feel like this is fading in and out. For a long time, industrial lands has been a priority for their policy agenda. Industrial lands that will support job growth, jobs, raising our average wage to be on par with the rest of the state, much less the rest of the country. So this is a big deal and a long time coming. But also recently in the last few years, our committee has recognized that affordable housing is a big deal, a very big deal. And it's linked with job creation, clearly. So we strongly encourage policy changes that will enhance the availability of housing at all levels of housing. How we do that, like was just recently said, that will be a multi-pronged approach, but that needs hard and serious work at our codes and our policies from a variety of organizations. So thank you very much for your efforts and for listening.
Thank you. Ed McMahon.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Ed McMahon. I'm proud to be the Executive Director of the Home Builders Association of Lane County, located at 1065 River Road, Eugene, 97404. And the planned testimony has gone out the window, but do appreciate the ability to be able to address you tonight. Do know that I have found over this process that me and I agree on a lot of things. There are a few things that she mentioned tonight that I'd like to give my opinion on. And I agree that the 1980 urban growth boundary expansion was huge, but that doesn't change the fact that today we are running out of buildable land for residential. Okay, so yeah, it was a huge expansion, but we've used it and we're reaching a critical mass. I also agree that there's been a lot of multifamily. A lot of that has been student housing. And what I've realized just recently, reading a lot about affordable housing, is the majority of affordable housing in our community is the existing housing stock. And so I sit back and realize that the neighborhoods around the university had good, affordable housing that has now been turned into student housing. We needed it. I'm not complaining with that, but one thing that I realize now is that the existing housing stock that we have needs to be protected. That is our affordable housing. And then we can find studies out there that will prove one side or the other side all day long. The most recent one that I studied had a direct link between affordability and supply and demand. and it made a lot of sense to me. And it took the metaphor of the automobile industry and the housing industry and explained how they both worked. And I firmly believe, absolutely, I know that an urban growth boundary expansion will help affordable housing. And if you'd asked me that 3 or 4 months ago, I'd have said, no, we're too late for an expansion to help affordable housing. But after seeing additional research and really looking into affordability, I'm convinced that number one, we need to protect our housing stock that we have, and number two, we do need to expand the boundary and have more supply. The demand is extremely high. The supply is coming on very slowly. We cannot keep up with the demand. And as I've said for about 3 years now, I predict without some major bubble or something, that within 5 years we will be out of new buildable lots for single family in Eugene. That's critical. And then you can only imagine what's going to happen to housing availability. I'm here for a different reason tonight, though. You know, about a year ago, I was in front of the Eugene City Council and asked them to consider separating the ordinances, one for jobs, parks, and schools, and one for single family. My intent behind that is I didn't want our appeal on single family to hold up the progress on job, parks, and schools. An honorable intent, because through the process, I'd gotten to the point where I realized a single family is going to be fixed, it's probably going to have to be fixed in Salem. So let's don't hold up jobs, parks, and schools. However, I hear tonight that the Eugene Sand and Gravel and maybe some protection on the large lots, the jobs, parks, and schools is going to be appealed as well to the state. So what I'm here to ask tonight is to consider, instead of two ordinances, one, jobs, parks, and schools, and single family all together in one ordinance. It's one Envision Eugene, it's one process, and it's all tied together. So I'm encouraging one ordinance instead of two. Neither one's going to be holding the other one up. And also do know that single family, even though it doesn't have an urban growth boundary expansion right now, it is going to require a metro plan amendment. They both are. It just seems a lot more efficient to me to proceed with one ordinance. And so that's my plea tonight. And I'll conclude by saying thank you so much to both boards for your volunteer service to our communities. It is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't have any more names or green slips. Are we missing anyone that wants to speak?
Okay, great. So staff, do you have any response to testimony you'd like to respond to? Okay, are there any questions that the commissioners wish to ask of staff for a response during deliberations? Yes, Commissioner Dworsky.
Since the comprehensive plan in this UGB is including the TSP, and the TSP had a public hearing, and some of the comments today were relating to transportation impacts and how they go back and multimodal, is staff tracking what's happening at those hearings to make sure it doesn't interfere with our land use?
Absolutely, yes. We're coordinating with the transportation system plan process very closely.
Commissioner Baker.
I just have a question for staff that maybe you can't answer right away, but the issue is if both proposals would be appealed, would there be any advantage of having them separate or combined?
Ask Emily to answer that one.
The ordinances were prepared separately. It's the way that we, is this on? Mm-hmm. Okay. It's the way that we propose ordinances, particularly land use ordinances, often when there are likely different parties that are interested in different aspects, and they can go forward independently of one another. We keep them separate for a couple of reasons. One is that in the local process, while we have these going together, obviously you're having a joint hearing on both of the ordinances tonight, and that is the intention with Lane County, or when we get to the elected officials, is to keep them together. But if one became extremely bogged down in political issues or a lot of questions, it would allow the elected officials to take action on one while they're still working on the other, and allow, for example, jobs, parks, and schools to go forward while they take a closer look at the single-family housing issues. The question that you've asked, Commissioner Baker, really, you asked about the appeal process. And, you know, these would not be physically hard for me to put back together. But in the appeal process, it's the same thing. So if the local governments do act on both of these ordinances, they would be appealed at the same time. And again, if parties raise issues with one and the other is okay, having them in separate ordinances allows the jobs, parks, and school ordinance, for example, to go into effect, and even if there's a remand on housing. So it enables folks to, you know, it's why we have them separate. It's appreciated when people provide testimony. I'm testifying tonight on this ordinance and not that ordinance. And although we're keeping one single record, it provides autonomy and some protections for those things that make it through the process, and they're not sort of held back by the things that aren't. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. I have a follow-up question on that, Emily. Then why aren't the schools and parks separated from industrial?
Well, you know, one thing that we've done in the past, because we were trying to be intuitive about what the real issues were, this process has been going on for, as you've heard, a long time. And frankly, hasn't been a lot of controversy about the need for the parks or the schools. And there's been pretty well established support throughout the process for an expansion for jobs, or this particular expansion for jobs. There has always been a lot of difficult discourse with respect to residential land. And staff may want to address that a little more closely, but we could see from the point at which I was asked to prepare ordinances, it was clear that there would be different camps interested in sort of that division. So we made a choice to establish the urban growth boundary in one ordinance, include all the expansions in that same ordinance, which is why, you know, the jobs, parks, and school ordinance is this big. And the residential ordinance deals with just the residential issues. So if we are so fortunate as to get political approval and approval from the state on the jobs, parks, and schools establishment and expansion, and we have to work more on residential, we're not holding all of this work up. We have at times in the preparation of our big code process in 2002, for example, taken this approach, and then one of these things gets very controversial and we pluck it out and we'd have 3 ordinances. We try to basically enable the local governments to get as much done as they can when they have big packages like this.
I'm going to use first names for Lane County commissioners because that's what I know. Commissioner Ryan.
Very good. Short question for county staff. The relevance of the question related to Jerry's and the reference to Goal 12, is there anything there for our county commission purview or relevance to what we are looking at? Is there a traffic aspect of this and that the county engineer would be looking at? And is there anything for us to be looking at there for the Goal 12 aspect of that question?
So Goal 12 is definitely a goal that needs to be addressed through this process. I defer to city staff to respond to the question, though, specifically whether or not they've analyzed it or not.
Sure. So our draft TSP anticipates will need to be amended to include projects to serve the expansion area. If the expansion area is approved, right now the TSP is based on the existing urban growth boundary, and so it doesn't include the Theona improvements or Cherry Street extension. But that would be an amendment we would have to make. And those are projects that would be added to the TSP. They don't get to intersection level improvements. Those would be further down the road as projects are designed.
Commissioner Dwight.
My question is a little bit, I think I asked this earlier when you made a presentation at Lane County on the housing side, because as a former mayor in Junction City, one of the issues we faced in the outlying cities around Eugene, also affected by the high density policy. If we're and one of the legs of this includes a mechanism for monitoring, but is there a mechanism there for adjusting the urban growth boundary this side of that 20-year period if you reach that critical mass? Because that does put a lot of pressure on outlying communities that have a lower density or just have land available to people that don't necessarily want to live in high density or apartment or just looking for different styles. So that the more high density, because Eugene is the biggest city, what is a mechanism for monitoring and adjusting if, as we've heard tonight, critical mass on affordable housing?
So I think your question is about how the monitoring program would be used to address those trends and how they relate to the small cities growth?
Correct. And adjust, because that does put quite a pressure on, Junction City, Harrisburg, Coburg, Cottage Grove, Crestwell, these outlying cities.
Yeah. We'll try to prepare some information for you on that for your deliberations.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Randall?
And I guess kind of to tag on to that, for Eugene staff, we did hear a lot about urban reserves and the monitoring program and the 3-year window. And I guess I'm wondering if there's any provision or any way for that 3-year window to be sped up and done quicker if we are truly reaching a critical mass and, being able to hit the ground running, so to speak, and be able to address a need before it really does get critical, if that's truly the way things are going.
Did you want to?
I guess just briefly, the 3-year commitment is what we're directed to bring back by our city council, but that's certainly up to the decision makers if they want to increase that or shorten that window of time.
Commissioner Nicolello?
For our deliberations, would you be able to prepare some information about the Eugene Sand and Gravel property and kind of what was some of the staff findings and council direction around that property? And then could you also dive a little bit more into some of the monitoring, because that's really come up a lot in the public hearing today. And I think particularly some of the things that would be helpful is, one, why weren't things like code amendments, like clear and objective standards addressed before we started this process? And then also, two, questions around the lot-specific metro plan, just to help us understand what that ongoing monitoring will look like. And thank you for putting this all together.
Commissioner Larry, I actually know his last name, Commissioner Thorpe.
Thank you. With respect to the question about the Eugene Sand property, my experience has been that in the process going through county zoning and with Dolgamy, it's not uncommon to designate exhausted aggregate sites for post-mining use. And I would be curious, as a part of that response, if you would identify whether that was done, and if so, what the post-mining use for that property was when it was zoned and licensed by Dolgamy. Second question, when we had our work session with you, there was some discussion about a drainage district north of the proposed industrial land, and I believe ongoing discussions between the city and the district's representatives on how the drainage from this new industrial area was going to be handled and how it would interface with what was going on with the drainage district. I'd appreciate it if you could give us an update on that and what the status is with respect to how that will be handled. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on a comment Bree made and pursue it a little bit further. Ms. Nelson, if I heard her correctly, offered to work with the staff to make an adjustment to the protection of the large industrial lots. And maybe I'm misunderstanding terminology regarding codes and ordinances and so forth, but is that a possibility in this process that can be ironed out before it gets too far down the line so that we may possibly avoid a LUBA appeal here?
Yes, that would be our intent, is to see if we can resolve those concerns in what we bring to you for your deliberations.
Okay, so then the follow-up back to Bree's comment, can a similar process occur with the residential building code so that we might avoid a LUBA issue in that regard? Here comes the LUBA proofer.
I think here's the difference that I think is important. The provisions, as I understand the concerns of Thousand Friends, they're concerned with some of the provisions that are in this package being proposed for adoption that would govern the expansion area, the Clear Lake area. So these are provisions that have never been adopted so far that we're proposing right now for your recommendation for the council. My understanding is that some of the other issues that have been brought up relate to issues in the current code and throughout Chapter 9. And while the council has expressed an interest and we actually have a work plan for addressing at least the issues that we've heard about tonight, they're not part of this package. They're not part of what they've requested right now. So is it impossible for the council to add something like that on? No. Would we need to renotice and probably have another hearing before you and the council? Yeah. So because the provisions, I feel like at this point we can respond to testimony and tweak, address, fix things that we hear need to be addressed in these packages. When you rise to the level of addressing entirely new pieces, we may need to back up.
So help me understand, Emily, and that's where the difference might be in code and ordinance and terminology that's being tossed around. For the industrial lands, the protection of the large lots, is that more a policy?
It's actually specific code provisions that are provided to you as part of the Clear Lake overlay zone. So state law makes it clear that if we're expanding in this area because we lack large lots, and what we're expanding to obtain is some available large lots for industrial uses, we need to adopt provisions that preserve them that way. And so
is that on one of the discs?
Actually, no. It's in your Eugene Code amendment behind the tab for Eugene Code. It's one of the provisions, and we can send you a specific.
Yeah, please. Okay.
Okay.
Can I just make a clarification just to make sure that, and I think you understand this, but I think some of the issues that were brought up about the existing Eugene Code. What Emily is saying that she's comfortable adjusting is the code language that's in here to codify the Clear Lake stuff. So we're writing new code here.
That's what I needed to know the distinction of. Okay.
Commissioner Mills.
Yeah, this is a question for the city attorney again. Flip side of what Ms. Nelson brought up for the large lot protection is an ongoing concern of mine, and we've talked about this before, and that is where we want to allow development on land that's not contiguous with the existing city limits. And I've gotten the impression that this is a very intractable problem for the city to handle, but I'm going to ask it again in light of the fact that we are introducing new code and an overlay, that some attempt to be made to address this problem in this code. So I'll be looking for some attempt or some refute of why it can't be done, because I think it's already cost us jobs and employers on the land we have, and if we don't address it in this new lot, we'll be facing the same problem again.
So I wanted to add myself in the queue. So I just want to revisit Gary's comment and respond to both Mia and home builders. So right now we are, I know monitoring has, the details is not, they're not included currently in our current package, yet there's some goals. Is there a way we can identify these pieces in terms of looking at the specifics of existing code and at least put it in as a kind of a subtext to our elected officials that's important to prioritize this, to just identify that we recognize this is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. The council at one point passed a motion that had a lot of directives to staff and what we bring to them. And in addition to the specifics, some specifics about what are in these packages, it also included a work plan for what happens. It laid out what planning in Eugene is supposed to work on once these things get acknowledged by the state. One of those things was specifically retooling the clear and objective standards in Eugene's code. We were one of the first cities in the state to comply with that state law. Not a lot's been done with those code provisions. I don't think there's anyone in this room who believes that they're working very well right now. And so that's on the list. I can't remember the exact time period, but we could certainly help point you in the direction of the timeline council plan for that. Maybe you want to urge them to act sooner after acknowledgement. Maybe you want to, say that that's extremely important. But we can show you where they did that, and you can point to that provision if that's what you're looking for.
So Dwight's got me thinking about how impacts about no urban growth boundary expansions and what that does on smaller communities out in the county. And this comment about what is in the work plan for all these other things that now need to be done. We've talked about urban reserves. Are urban reserves a part of the plan?
Yes.
Okay, then Lydia or Mark, I think it would be useful for us in the county to understand how urban reserves would work, what the criteria is for those, how establishing an urban reserve is different from a UGB.
We'll be happy to.
And you don't have to answer that tonight, Lydia.
We'll prepare
okay.
for you.
Yeah.
For your deliberation.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, Commissioner Leddick, in case there's any confusion. The urban reserves is part of the work plan that council has directed us to do. It's not part of what you're deliberating or discussing as part of the urban growth boundary package.
At some point in time, we ought to talk about what that's all about, okay?
Commissioner Ryan.
And just to follow up on Commissioner Leddick's question, I was specifically interested in the amortizing of the future costs of the expanded infrastructure. The discussions with MWMC. I don't want to get down into the weeds too much, but how does, or does that, is that part of the 50-year study? I imagine it is. And when does that happen? But we can save that for the next discussion.
Are there any other questions from commissioners? Oh, Commissioner Baker. Thank you.
Again, I was going to ask direct staff that you don't have to answer it now, but maybe you could, it was suggested that we separate out parks and schools, which doesn't seem to have any strong objections, and just if the staff could maybe get back to us and indicate how much trouble it would be to pull that out as a separate ordinance.
To put parks and schools together in a separate ordinance from jobs?
Yes, just so we would know, we can make an informed decision if that would be something to consider.
Is there another? No. Okay. More. At this time, we'd like to close the public hearing. And I guess I'm going to close the Eugene Planning Commission's public hearing at this time.
Any reason to keep the public hearing open for the Lane County Planning Commission? Hearing none, then our public hearing's closed as well. Fortunate that happened.
Can I have a point of clarification? The hearing, we often talk in terms of hearing and record. This is a legislative matter, so technically speaking, there's no point in time at which we would not accept evidence into the record. Our understanding is if you close the public record tonight along with the hearing, New written evidence or testimony that comes in would be reserved so that it could be forwarded with your recommendation to the elected officials. So if in fact you actually want to collect more written testimony, then I would ask you to be clear about how you're going to keep the record open for that. So a good idea would either be a motion that says also closing the public record as of tonight, or something different if you want to discuss that.
Okay, great. That was my misstep. I saw, yes. So.
No misstep, you're good.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Okay. So is there any thought, Commissioner Baker?
Yeah, I would just suggest we leave the public record open for a week and then have it be closed at, a week from today at 5 p.m. just to allow people who are here who wanted to submit something in writing could get it to us for our deliberations.
Lane County Planning Commission okay with keeping the record open for 1 week?
Just a comment. We're expecting a number of things from staff. What we're doing is merely a recommendation, so all this stuff's going to go on to the board and the council anyway, so it probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But I'm sure that some of the folks who have commented tonight would like an opportunity to comment on what staff has to say in the responses to the commissioners' questions. And I presume that even if the record's not open, they'll have plenty of opportunity to do that when this whole matter goes to the board and the council. So I don't know there's any real reason to keep the record open for more than a short period of time. People get another bite of the apple.
Is a week acceptable to you? Okay. We don't need a motion for that. We'll just.
I'd like our commission to, just for the record, the motion would be to keep the record open to accept written testimony that would be forwarded to both planning commissions until 5 o'clock on March 14th.
So moved. Second.
Discussion?
I'll second.
Oh, he already seconded.
Moved by Melia.
It's been seconded.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Commissioner Randall seconded. A discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Okay, then that's what we'll do for Lane County Planning Commission as well, if that's good with you guys. Okay.
Okay.
So our deliberations are set for May 2nd. And at one point in time, there was some thought about, do we need another night to deal with this, or do you think just one night, May 2nd, would do it for us? That's the only item on the agenda.
And I just clarify, Mark Russ confirmed that you have the whole evening on May 2nd, both a work session and deliberations. So you'll have that full.
So alternatively, if we would want another evening, we would be looking at April 25th. So what's the preference of the members of the commission? One night on the 2nd or 2 nights? We've got one night here. Anybody want 2 nights? Okay, we'll stick with just May 2nd. We're a very efficient group. And we go by first names.
Exactly. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Baker.
I just have a question for the chair and we originally had a hearing scheduled on Thursday. I was just wondering if we can get some determination of what's going on.
The hearings, it's been closed. So at this point, it's my understanding, we are moving to deliberations. So we don't need to actually take advantage of the second hearing night. We're very efficient.
So then the public will be notified that there's not a hearing on Thursday?
Yeah, there was never notice of that.
There's no notice.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, good. I wasn't sure because
Thank you.
we got noticed, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So are there closing comments from staff? Any responses?
I guess I would just say the next step for the Eugene Planning Commission would be your scheduled deliberation on April 10th. And we'll be preparing answers to your questions for both commissions and getting that out to you ahead of that time.
Yeah, Commissioner Randall.
And I just wanted to jump in, and I know we're already closed, and I know there were a lot of people and a lot of staff that worked on this, but I just especially wanted to thank Terry for all her hard work and leading the charge on this. So good job.
Yeah, great job.
One last thing for us.
Yes.
So our next meeting is March 21st. It's a long meeting. We have a work session at 6. and that's deliberations. No, we've got a work session on code amendments. Then we have a meeting on deliberation on a carryover plus 2 public hearings. So it's important. That'll be back over at the Customer Service Center, March 21st.
Okay, and our next meeting, like Emily or Terry said, is April 10th.
We have a meeting before then, though, I believe.
No, for deliberations.
Yeah.
Another gavel.
Should we do it together?
Yes.
We're closed.
Close. Thank you.